without further ado, I'd like to introduce John Green.
A place to put this, so hold on.
I'll carry it.
Hi, thanks for coming. Jeez. I'm sorry to those of you who have to stand, but thanks for coming up. I was going to say that I'm going to try to make this short, but I'm not. I'm going to try to make it the exact right length. Hold on, I'm going to slightly reposition myself. Thank you. What's your name?
Cameron.
Cameron has a couple thousand people in his lap. So I'm very grateful to him and his extraordinary lap strength. I also want to thank the City of Plainfield and the library here. As it is National Library Week, I thought I would start out by talking a little bit about libraries and why I think they're so important. It's not just because they make events like this one free, although that is really nice and I really appreciate it, and I'm sure that y'all do too. It's also because, you know, on the internet, and a lot of us are from the internet, I see that a lot of us are like mediating this experience through some kind of recording device. On the internet, we have this somewhat insane belief that all of our questions can be answered effectively and efficiently by Google. I know this because sometimes I make videos, for those of you who don't know, I make videos on the internet with my brother, and that's why some of the people who are here tonight are here. I know this because sometimes I will make videos in which I ask Google, just is, the word is, and then I hit space, and Google will tell me the 10 things that people Google the most beginning is, one of which, thanks to Nerdfighteria, is Hank Green awesome? And then if you click I'm feeling lucky, it takes you to a website that just says yes. But the other questions are ludicrous, and clearly questions that Google cannot answer. By the way, Google also can't ultimately answer whether Hank Green is awesome, although he is. So we have this habit of believing that Google contains the world's store of information. Well, first off, that's not true. We know that it's not true. Like recently, in our community, in our video blog community, very briefly, I was in Knightstown, Indiana. I made a video from there. I was in a cemetery. Very briefly, I panned past a grave of a guy named Walter Manlove, who died when he was just 26 years old of tuberculosis. I didn't know that at the time. And his wife, Gussie Manlove, which was a heck of a name, and they had her birth year on the tombstone, but not her death year, which strongly implied to me that she was perhaps not buried there, or else that she was like 114. And I just made a quick comment about this, and then I moved on with the rest of the video and everything. And a few days later, I looked in our forum, and I noticed that a lot of people were trying to find out what happened to Gussie Manlove. And the actual story of what happened to her turns out to be amazing. And we ended up finding where she actually is buried in my hometown of Indianapolis at Crown Hill Cemetery, where my grandparents are buried. And it was what was fascinating about that process was that Google could provide us with very little of the information that we needed in order to find out what happened to Gussie Manlove. I mean, at the end, it was me in a library with microfilm, like 1975 style, scrolling through the obituaries for the Indianapolis Star for every day in October. Now, there may come a day when Google can answer all of our questions, but the idea that the world's store of information is contained inside the internet, the publicly available internet, that's just not true. A lot of the information that we need and that we value is here in your public library, and you can't have access to it unless you are fantastically wealthy, unless you are here at your public library. That's the first thing that I would say. The second thing that I would say is that for many, many millions of people, the internet the broadband, high-speed, YouTube-era internet is not something that they have in their houses. And one of the founding principles of the American idea, at least in my opinion, is the idea that all people, all of our citizens, will have access to information. They will have access to the exact same set of information as wealthy or privileged people would. And I think it's a very valuable idea. And I still believe in that ideal. And I see that alive in our public libraries in America. And so I'm very, very proud to be here today at the library during National Library Week. So, also, it's quite fancy. Aside from making videos on the internet about dead ladies, I also do some other stuff. I write books, although I haven't published one that I wrote by myself since 2008. And so today I thought I would tell you a story of failure. Several stories of failure before I take your questions. And it all begins in October of 2008 when my book Paper Towns came out. I was very proud of this book. It's about two kids, Margot Roth Spiegelman and Quentin Jacobson, who are next door neighbors, and the boy has been in love with the girl forever, and he romanticizes her in the way that boys do with girls who they've been in love with forever, or girls do with boys they've been in love with forever, or vampires, or whatever it is. I was really fascinated when I started out with this book, thinking about the way we imagine other people as more simple, less complex than ourselves. Like, you see that in pretty much every novel ever written, particularly any first-person narrative. The narrator of that novel is far more ultimately interested in him or herself than in anyone else. That's also true in all of our lives. Like, no matter how much I like my wife or my kid, I always see them in the context of myself, my wife, my kid. I'm never able to see what it's like. Like, I have no idea what it's like to be 14 months old. I have no idea what it's like to be Henry. On some fundamental level, like, I cannot even be sure that Henry is like a person in the same way that I'm a person. He doesn't act like I act. Like, he doesn't do things the way that I would do them. He's 14 months old. Like, there are a number of things that he does every day that I do not associate with humanity, you know? Like, earlier today he was eating a Fig Newton, and he couldn't figure out, like, he had it in his hand like this, and he was just biting on his fingers, like, desperately trying to get to the piggy part of the Newton. And I was like, Henry, if you just pull it out, there's going to be tons of Newton there. And so I went to show him, and I, like, got, like, this close, and he was like, no! No! And I was like, God, you just pulled a... It's in your best interest to let me help you. But he was like, you're not taking away my Fig Newton. And I was like, well, you're not eating it, so we are at an impasse. I have no idea what it's like to be that into a Fig Newton that I can't even eat. I was really fascinated by that problem. I wrote the book to try to get at some of the ideas of how we imagine people complexly, how we act empathically in the world, and then the book came out, and a lot more people read it than I thought were going to read it, and I kind of freaked out. And then I remember, like, being on tour for Paper Towns, and it was the first time I'd ever done readings where there were more than like 4 or 5 people, and I just remember thinking, like, I really have to write a really good book for these people. Like, my next book better not suck. And I think I let that pressure kind of take over my life in some ways. So anyway, I decided I was going to write this book called The Sequel, and that the sequel was going to be a sequel to a non-existent novel. It was going to be a sequel to a fictional novel. I was really interested in this idea. It seemed very clever to me, and I thought that you guys would all think about how clever I am and be very impressed with me. David Foster Wallace used to describe writing that he didn't like as, "Look, Mom, no hands." It was very, "Look, Mom, no hands." And then I decided I was going to write this zombie apocalypse novel. Does anyone have that, by the way? Great. Can someone get a copy of it for me? Like, hand me a copy? If anyone has it printed out.
I have it on a Kindle.
I don't know how to use a Kindle. I'm just going to read you the first page of my zombie apocalypse novella, Zombicorns. All right. Pre-zombification, my father was already obsessed with corn. He told me almost every day that corn was in control of us. Corn wants the world to contain more corn, so corn evolves us to agree with it. Corn tells us that we could make sugar out of corn, or fuel out of corn, or plastic out of corn. The flu makes you cough, which spreads the flu, and corn makes you corn hungry, which spreads corn. He got this idea from a book, and he never ceased to be amazed by it. For years he would talk about it. We'd be eating mashed potatoes or something, and he'd say, you know, potatoes are impossible without corn. He meant that metaphorically, although it is now nearly true literally. I think my dad was so fascinated by this idea because he realized on some fundamental level that he was not in control of his desires. I think he woke up every morning in his nice house with hardwood floors and granite countertops and wondered why he desired granite countertops and hardwood floors, wondered who precisely was running his life. Most people never stop to wonder why they like Pop-Tarts or rain-flow shower heads or skinny girls or whatever it is they like. Although my father never abandoned the narrowly circumscribed suburban life he was fated to desire, the why of it all nagged at him. I inherited that penchant for intellectualism, a character flaw that these days can only be thoroughly eradicated by getting Z'd up. Anyway, I've been thinking about the old man because it was a year ago today that I shot him in the chest with a hollow point .45 caliber bullet. He kind of smiled as he fell backwards onto the overstuffed living room couch. He took a minute to die, and it was the smilingest minute I'd ever seen from him. A lot of the Z'd up smile when you kill them. I don't know if they're grateful or amused or what, but it helps with the guilt, which quite a lot of people feel. I knew a kid once who was the kind of sentimentalist who found it troubling to think of himself as a murderer. So he called killing Z's completing them. I liked that. That kid, his name was Marcos. He got Z'd up somehow. We were living in this really nice, heavily chandeliered Lincoln Park townhouse with a few other humanoid types. And then one morning, Marcos made a go at my puppy, Mr. President. And I had to complete him. I completed his head all over the dining room credenza of our townhouse. And then me and Mr. President bolted for the proverbial higher ground. Newsies go for dogs and cats and cows first when they've still got enough of a moral compass to recognize that separating human beings from their vital organs, aside from being ethically troubling, is cannibalistic. It is my own moral compass that has done me in now, working through the last few gallons of the gas that runs the generator that pumps the putrid Z'd out air down here in my Lincoln Square cellar, eating through the last rusted cans of diced tomatoes and Spam, drinking very expensive wine at the rate of precisely 1 bottle per day, watching the shelves empty out, wondering, as my father did, what terrible monster lurking inside of me forces me to go on rowing against the current when I could just walk up a staircase, unlock this cellar door, and get Z'd up like a normal person. So that's the first page of my zombie apocalypse development. So, thank you. You want your phone? You want your phone? That's okay. I got it. Right, so those of you who are familiar with my work know that I've never shot anyone in any of my novels. I'm not particularly interested in violence, either IRL or as a theme in literature. I'm pretty nerdy. I hunted as a young man, but with great trepidation and profound sadness. I wrote that story, and the whole time I was writing it, I was thinking, like, I am writing this story because I'm going to write, like, the great American zombie apocalypse novel. And it slowly dawned on me that, like, A, I was not writing a good zombie apocalypse novel. And B, perhaps more importantly, I wasn't really interested in zombies or in their completion. What I was interested in is the problem that girl experiences at the beginning of the novel, which is that she's confronted by not only her mortality, but the temporariness of the entire human enterprise, and she's troubled by that. And that's, I think, what was happening to me when I started writing the book that is now going to be my new book. I was thinking a lot. I remember I started a reading once in San Francisco. This was at like the height of my thinking about this stuff. I started a reading once in San Francisco by saying, well, can I tell you a funny story? I can, because I have a microphone. So I started this reading in San Francisco by saying that we were all going to die, and that not only are all of us going to die, but that everyone we ever loved will die, and all of their descendants will die. And one day there will come a time when the human species is not only not in existence, but also not remembered, right? So there will be no conscious beings left to recognize that we ever did anything. I mean, part of the allure of Star Wars as a narrative is that it happened a long, long time ago. That there might have been, in eons past, like sentient creatures about whom we know nothing. And one day, in all likelihood at least, we will be like Star Wars, a kind of, surviving, if at all, as a fiction. And this really troubled me, this fact that, like, not only are people not going to remember, like, me or you, but people aren't going to remember, like, Aristotle. It was very upsetting to me that, like, we went to all this trouble to make houses and cars, and it's all going to fall apart and be forgotten, and it will all have been for nothing. So I started this reading in San Francisco by saying all of that. And people were like giggling the whole time. And I was like, I don't think this is funny at all. And I convinced myself that like they were uncomfortable because I was presenting them with a profound truth. And I went on, I talked for like 20 more minutes, and then I was like, are there any questions? And like every hand in the audience went up, and I was like, of course, because I'm a genius. So I called on someone, and they were like, Mr. Bean, are you aware that your fly is down? And it wasn't down, it was like open. Like a canyon. It was just brutal. You can imagine the next like 5 to 10 minutes of my life just haunting. I'll never forget it. Actually, I will forget it because I'm going to die. So I wrote this zombie apocalypse novella that I thought was a zombie apocalypse novella, but was actually this like not very good meditation about the temporariness of the human endeavor. And then I decided, okay, I'm not going to write that zombie apocalypse novella because I'm trying to write about the temporariness of the human endeavor. At this point, I've been working for like a year. So I'm going to write a desert island novel. This is, I think, still on my Wikipedia page that I'm writing this desert island novel. And it's going to be like Lord of the Flies, except better. Right? That was my big idea. And I wrote the whole thing. I wrote this whole desert island novel. It's not very good. It's like aggressively bad, actually. And I say this to introduce you to the idea that writers, even published writers who aren't at the beginning of their career, not only revise a lot, but also fail a lot. And that's okay, and that's part of the process. And if you feel like you're not ever failing as a writer or as a person, you're doing something wrong. Failure is an important part of writing. So I wrote this whole desert island novel, terrible. Oh, has like 6 paragraphs in it that I don't hate, out of 60,000 words. And then I was like almost done with it, and all this time, the last 4 years, I've been writing about this children's hospital in my spare time because no one would want to read this children's hospital novel that I was writing. And I realized that the children's hospital novel, I abandoned the desert island novel, and I was like, it's the children's hospital novel. That's the one. Terrible. Total epic failure. But then, when I finally realized what I was interested in, when I finally realized like the question that I found interesting, in the same way that when I was writing Paper Towns, the question that I found interesting was how do we learn to believe in each other's existence? When I finally realized that the question was about our existence and whether and how it's temporary, and whether and how that temporariness should affect the decisions that we make on a daily basis. When I finally realized that, it became exceptionally easy to write this stupid novel that I've been working on for 4 years that I'm going to read a little bit of. So, I'm only going to read a little bit of this. Your knees warm?
Yeah.
I sympathize because my knees get warm every day putting this on my lap. Okay.
Battery's gone, sorry.
That sounded very